Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. Is Ukraine war, I don't know, live, update, news, extra, everything all rolled into one. I've had a very long day today and I'm glad to be sitting back in this seat that I seem to spend most of my life in, having spent all day stood up, walking around, shouting at my son's stuff, his rugby performance, which is magnificent. Anyway, what with my multiple sclerosis, I can barely stand now. So I'm happy to be sat down and back into talking about Ukraine. If I stumble over my words and get things confused, I'm sorry. As I say, it's been a really long day. Now, I don't know if dual audio echo. Well, that's going to be a bit of a problem. Um, hopefully I'm not going to have to start again. Is there? Can you put in the comments if there is an audio issue? So no. Oh, someone else said no. Two screens open. That's lucky. Phew. Okay, so brilliant. Like, let's go there. I'm going to start. What I'm going to do is do my normal news video, and bear in mind a lot of these were curated over last night into this morning, so they might be a little bit out of date, but I don't know. And then we'll go on to do a little bit of an extra where I can talk about some stuff, you know, to do as pertains to the war. So my usual extra and news all rolled into one. Anyway, let's get started. So we're going to go first to our figures, usual figures, all the caveats. Goodness me, shall I do a live caveat? All the usual caveats apply. Inaccurate propaganda. I find them useful, indicatively useful, particularly in terms of the trends. The headline figures might be inaccurate, certainly in the number of troops and maybe some of the aircraft figures from earlier on in the conflict, I think are somewhat inaccurate. But these days, the daily figures, particularly for equipment, I do find pretty accurate. So 470 liquidated personnel, that is now being right down to the lower end of the scale. And I think that's, again, as I keep saying, an indication of the transition period that we're in between Russia being on the offensive and Ukraine starting their counteroffensive. So there is a lack of activity up and down the line, yet there are going to be hot points like Bakhmut, for example. Bakhmut is obviously, as it has long been, a central point of fighting, and I think the Russians are going to be very keen to get something gained there by the 9th of May. But you hear these rumors that the Ukrainians might have something up their sleeves in terms of a surprise, because you can bet your bottom dollar that they will not want Russia to have any PR victory on the 9th of May. Uh, Putin loves his symbolism, likes the dates. They're important to him. He's failed to be able to gain any big wins on previous dates that have come along. This will be a huge one. And I don't know, maybe Ukraine do have something that they could throw into the mixer to really put a spanner in the works for the Russian success there. 2 tanks, 5 APCs, pretty low. 6 artillery systems, 1 MLRS, fairly low again. 1 anti-aircraft system could be useful, just depends what that is. Is it an autocannon? Not so important. Is that an S-300? Super important, somewhere in between, don't know. So 4 drones, 6 fuel tanks or vehicles, and 2 pieces of special equipment. 2 pieces of special equipment is useful, as you can see the average there, considering we're at what, 430, something around that number. There's less than 1 a day, so 2 pieces of special equipment would be electronic warfare or radar installations or something like that. I think it is useful for the Ukrainians to get that number, and they are consistently getting 2, 3 a day in the special equipment at the moment, and I think that is a reflection of the work they're doing in sort of counter battery and shaping the battlefield for the coming counteroffensive. Right, so let's go on to the next thing to talk about. Just make sure everyone is still in in the live comments is okay. Brilliant. Good to see you all on board. Right, almost 200 of you. Fantastic. Russia can still produce missiles despite depleting its reserves. So I shared with you a recent Excel spreadsheet that someone had done, Special Curse on Cat, I think, had done an analysis of the usage of missiles by the Russians, and it appears that their latest saturation attack was really only at the kind of levels of what they can produce. And if Russia had, so it's always about two hypotheses, right? What does the data better support? The hypothesis that Russia's got loads of missiles, big stockpiles, and they can use them willy nilly, or Russia is running short on missiles. They have depleted their stocks to the point that uh, they they can't throw out missiles at the rates they used to. Okay, so what do we see from the latest usage of the Russians? Well, it appears that they are sending missiles at the rate that they are producing them, that they can produce them, and this feeds into the hypothesis that they are running low on stocks. So Russia can still produce missiles despite depleting its reserves. Remnants of the missiles used in recent attacks on Ukraine were found to bear fresh markings indicating that they were manufactured last autumn and winter. Uh, so they're only 4, 5, 6 years, 6 months old. Sorry. Now, again, what would you expect if they had big stockpiles of missiles? Well, they'll be using their stockpiles rather than using newer missiles. You'd want to use up the old ones, otherwise they'll get so old that they're unusable. So you want to use them up before you start using new ones. If they're using their new ones that they've built in the last 6 months, it shows you that they don't have those stocks. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I know pro-Russian voices will be sort of laughing at that. Oh, you say they're running out, they're still using. No, they're using them at a rate that is different from the rate that they were using when they had a shed load of these things. Okay, moving on. Kramatorsk has been hit. Kramatorsk was hit 5 missiles. One of the missiles targeted a residential area of the city, and the rest hit an industrial area and a field outside Kramatorsk. There were no casualties, and that is what the Ukrainians are saying. Of course, we don't know if that's definitely the case. So to give the Russians their due, the Russians will do this as well. The Ukrainians will never admit when something important has been hit. And here, nothing important has been hit. Here are some residential blocks that have been hit. So we know that routinely the Russians hit residential blocks because they're using predominantly inaccurate missiles. This kind of missile attack will probably be S-300s. Kramatorsk is a place that gets hit by S-300s. In case you don't know where Kramatorsk is, let's bring up my usual war map and map to give you. I don't want to assume. If I assume, it makes an ass out of you and me, as the classic maxim goes. So I don't assume you know where all these places are. Kramatorsk is there behind Bakhmut. So these places, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka, these get regularly hit and have been regularly hit by missile attacks over the whole conflict. Really. Kramatorsk was hit, as I say, last night, probably S-300 missiles. These are inaccurate when using the ground-to-ground mode. You can argue it's the wrong missile to use for that objective. And if that is the case, if they could have used other missiles to do a better job and be more accurate, and they knew it would be inaccurate, and they knew it would have a high chance of hitting residential areas, then you can class that as a war crime. And these kind of things will get argued about ad infinitum, no doubt, ad nauseum. But I would argue on the side that, yeah, it's pretty war crimey. Now, of the hit in Kramatorsk, Defmon here is responding to Russian claims that so this claim here from Gherkin, Igor Gherkin, the claim is that 200 tons of ammo exploded in Kramatorsk. I don't believe that for a second. People would have noticed. And then he says, look, this is what something looks like where you have 20 odd tons that's 21 tons. It's an absolutely massive explosion. So and this is 300 tons, so on and so forth. And he says, that being said, if they would have hit 200 tons of ammunition, it does not mean it would all detonate. Another thing, 200 tons of munition is not the same as 200 tons of explosives. I do, however, still think that something like that would have been noticed. Got news, there is not damage at the Kramatorsk train station. This might have been a secret special military operation, so secret that Ukrainians did not even notice. So he's basically dismissing the claims of Igor Gherkin that a big ammunition depot or big load of ammunition was hit. 200 tons is huge. Again, if that something like that had happened, you wouldn't expect Ukrainians to release news of that in the kind of psyops controlling the information space. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's unlikely, though, it would be to that extent. Okay, moving on. On April 29th, so if you remember, I reported on Sevastopol oil depot getting hit. There's a really big explosion or set of explosions, loads of fire. It turns out the Ukrainian forces used cheap Chinese drones to destroy a major oil depot near the Russian Black Sea fleet's base in Sevastopol, causing a huge fire. So both sides can use Chinese drones, right? They are not the exclusive remit of the Russians. Just checking, make sure you're all okay in the live chat there. Good to have you all on board. Thank you. Right, moving on. Well, I say moving on. Is there anything else to be said about that? Ukrainians are indigenously making their own drones at the moment. They're very busy making things like shark drones and these longer range drones, and they'll be trying them out all the time. It's just interesting. I don't know what drones were used here, but apparently cheaper Chinese ones. Now, as a result of that, the strike on the Sevastopol oil depot, and we had this last time when I think the Naval Institute building was hit by a drone in Sevastopol some time back. You suddenly had people getting jittery around Crimea, and you had people leaving en masse from Crimea. Well, there are claims again that there are traffic jams to flee Crimea, and they've continued through the night. Says this source. I believe that the May holidays, May the 1st is a bank holiday in Russia, are simply cancelled. So yeah, that could well be happening. Always treat these kind of claims with a little bit of skepticism. How long lasting are these? Is it just a normal traffic jam you might expect at this time of year, or is this an ongoing problem? I would personally, if I lived in Crimea as a pro-Russian, and especially if I've been shipped into Crimea, one of these people that's been kind of moved in as the pro-Ukrainians have left since 2014, it's been annexed, and the Russians are trying to make it look as if it's a far more Russian place. So they're bringing loads of indigenous ethnic Russians. If I was one of those people, I'd be thinking, yeah, I don't know, things aren't looking too good at the moment. If I've got a place, if I've got relatives, or I've got my old place back in Russia, yeah, probably want to live there rather than in the middle of a war zone to happen. So I don't know. You might expect Russians to be moving in that direction. Okay, Bryansk region in Russia has had a very restless night. This would have been last night. Russia should expect this to happen more and more. There have been strikes, it appears, in Bryansk across the border. I was talking recently, just to remind some people and for newbies, it's interesting to talk about how private military companies, these mercenary units have been set up. You've got Shoigu's Redut one, you've got obviously the Wagner PMC, but you've also got the Gazprom, the energy company or the monopoly that does all the hydrocarbons in Russia, has its own PMCs as well. And I find that interesting because if they are sending troops down to fight on the front line in Russia, I would say that makes anything that Gazprom do a legitimate target for Ukrainian hits. So I think it would be fine for Ukraine to hit into Russia and to hit Gazprom installations or whatever, and say, well, if you're sending troops to attack us, then I think we're justified in doing that. So I think that's an interesting scenario there. A fire has reportedly occurred near the city of Perm in western Russia, an electrical substation that powers the PGJSC Motovilka plant, which produces multiple launch rockets and artillery shells for the Russian military. Now, is this sabotage? Is this partisan activity? Is this a careless Russian smoker? I don't know. But it's good news when that kind of activity takes place, of course, from a Ukrainian point of view. Right, that's all the losses and hits stuff. Let's move on to odds and sods. We're going to go run through Kenneth Gregg's statement. Again, this is from last night. No, this is from this morning, actually. Sorry. So he's your Swedish fighter that is somewhere in Ukraine. I think he has been on the front line. I don't think he's on the front line at the moment. He's doing other stuff to do with like trying to raise funds for energy provision stuff. But he gives a daily update of what's going on. He has obviously lots of contacts. He says, but still take his claims with a pinch of salt, of course. I can start by reporting a Ukrainian success in Avdiivka at the Vodyanye Opitny lines. The Russians have withdrawn after being subjected to violent attacks by ours. They lost more than 60% of their men on duty. Just to remind you, Avdiivka is down here. It is rather similar. It's like Bakhmut 2.0. It's sort of 2/3 encircled, but the Russians are struggling to do that final pincer to properly close it, as they felt doing Bakhmut, so they're fighting through it. In Avdiivka, they're not really fighting through it. They're still trying to make advances to the south and to the north. So the south is Vodyany and Pisky and Pervomaisky. So this is what Kenneth Gregg is referring to here. But they have been subjected to a violent attack by the Ukrainians. It seems to be some kind of counterattack, and they lost more than 60% of their men on duty. Urban fighting in Mariinka, so that's further down south. Here is Mariinka, where there's been fierce fighting for a long time now, awful long time, in fact, longer than this current iteration of the conflict. So urban fighting in Mariinka has resumed, and according to the latest report from my contacts, there we have partial success. The Russians have concentrated their reserves in Krutabalka, and they are now in our sights. In Bakhmut itself, what is left of it, about 13%, he reckons. The same intense street fighting is going on as before. We continue to wait for the massive artillery fire from the Russians. They are in place for the third day, but not active. Is it perhaps the internal struggle between the regular army and Wagner? That is a reason for this. Do they want Wagner to bleed to death and become weak? Unbelievable that they have internal political problems and let the individual soldier bleed to death. But on the other hand, we thank them for that. I mean, yeah, take those issues when they come, and eat the popcorn, sit back and watch it, as you've got internal struggles between different PMCs and between the regular Russian forces, your VDV, the airborne troops, the paratroopers who are in the Bakhmut area, and the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic kind of militias are also in the area, plus all the other conventional forces. Yeah, brilliant. If you're going to argue with each other, if you're going to have power struggles between the Kremlin and Prigozhin and whatever, brilliant. You go for it. Long may it continue. Regarding the upcoming major offensive, I can reveal the following. 40,000 soldiers who have been trained abroad have arrived at their positions. We have received long-range rockets. We have got the armored vehicles ready. The second wave soldiers have left their regiments and are going to their assembly points. And stage one of the destruction of the Russians' fuel and weapons depots has been activated. As a bonus of these pinprick operations, we have caused panic among the local population, including Crimea. I refer you back to the previous post on the traffic jams there. We continuously practice how to penetrate the so-called dragon's teeth that the Russians have placed. Now it's up to the weather. I think you're going to see an attack probably. It's going to be mid to late May now, isn't it? I don't think you'll see it any sooner than that, unless they're going to try and get one in before the 9th of May. That might be an interesting. You don't want the Ukrainians to rush it. You want them to be ready. Huge amounts of equipment has gone over. I was speaking to someone today who knew someone in Roll Logistics, which is a British military logistics, who's over in Europe, just saying that the amount of equipment that's gone through Eastern Europe is staggering. And you can bet as well that there's been a shell hunger. I've been saying this for some time. I think there's been a shell hunger up and down lines in Ukraine, that they have had a lack of ammunition, largely because they will be stockpiling more than enough ammunition for the counteroffensive. So I guess they will have an absolute ton of ammunition, literally tons of ammunition to fire. I'm sure that they won't have a shortage when it comes to the counteroffensive, but that will be why they might have a shortage right now up and down the front line, because they've been ring fencing it for that. Okay, PBS News has an interview with the head of the GUR, Budanov. The top priority, quote, the top priority is still to liberate all temporarily occupied territories. This goes back to the idea, will they try to liberate Crimea? Or I think that's going to be one step too far. I don't think they'll have enough of an ability to do that. And we'll come on to talk about that in a second. But it is still the intention. I mean, Budanov has said repeatedly for the last year that, he said for a long time now that you will see Ukrainian troops in Crimea by the end of spring. So who knows? Is that psyops? I mean, he is the head of intelligence, right? So it's the sort of thing he would say to put the Russians off balance, but it could also be what the intention is. I think going into Crimea with troops, it would be too difficult, and I would try and gain the rest of the territories before that. Or at least the rest of the southern territories. Make sure you've got that. Hammer Crimea from a distance with missiles, just huge amounts of drones and missiles, so it becomes untenable to stay in Crimea. So we go. Sorry to repeat myself. This is what I've said time and time again, which is, if you do some kind of, I don't know, move down here, either or both and whatever, some kind of counteroffensive down into uh, Zaporizhia, Western Donetsk, down to the coast, make a land bridge down to the coast, and then you cut off this area. You hit the Kerch Bridge, maybe, which we know that they can reach there or thereabouts with their Hrim 2, their Thunder 2 missiles that they're starting to use. And once that happens, then you are effectively starving this entire Kherson Oblast and Zaporizhia Oblast area. So they can't be supplied because they can't be supplied up there and they can't be supplied from the east. So then you kind of hit across the river whilst also hitting from there, and you take this whole area. And once you've got this whole area, you basically have this under your control. I personally, I wouldn't. This would be more important than the Donbass for me at the moment. Then you just have your long-range missiles placed in this area, somewhere around here, and you just absolutely hammer Zhankoi, Simferopol, Sevastopol, uh, until it becomes pointless for the Russians to remain there. The civilians will already have broadly done a runner as they are at the moment, and only when it's been absolutely hammered with ordnance do you consider moving your troops and mechanized equipment in there. I wouldn't bother doing that anywhere before that. You really have to soften the whole of Crimea up before doing that. But I'm no military expert, so correct me if I'm wrong. Right. So another top level sacking by Putin. It is again, what hypothesis does this better support? So when you're doing really militarily very well, do you move your top brass around? Do you say, excellent guys, you've done really well. This is brilliant. Well done. I'm going to congratulate you by sacking you. Or I'm going to congratulate you by you've done such a good job here. I'm going to move you off to do a job over there. No. So what hypothesis does that support, that kind of movement of personnel? It supports the fact that you're not doing very well. Things haven't gone well, so we need to move stuff around here. So we need to get someone in that can actually do a better job of doing this kind of war thing. So again, this kind of activity supports the hypothesis very strongly that Russia know they're not doing very well. There you go. They are not doing very well. Um, right. So, yeah, the Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev has been a deputy minister of defense responsible for logistics of the armed forces since September. I did report this the other day. He's been quietly being replaced by Colonel General Alexei Kuzmenkov. He's not the only one. A bunch of people have been moved sideways and down. Ukraine will not compromise with Russia, which is not interested in negotiations. Concessions will not ensure stable peace in Ukraine, says the deputy head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Melnik. A rotten compromise cannot provide a stable peace for all of us, at most a fragile ceasefire. Any discussion of negotiations is also complete nonsense because the Russians do not want to negotiate at all. Now, obviously, the Ukrainians at this point, on the brink of a counteroffensive, are not going to be talking about concessions and negotiations. They are on the brink of being able to really pressure the Russians here. And what they want is as much success as possible, so that if it does come to a point where the counteroffensive culminates, and people are thinking, right, now's the time, they'll be in a much stronger, better position to say, hey, you don't have Crimea anymore. Right, let's go to the negotiating table now, because Russia won't be able to say, well, we want to keep Crimea because you ain't got it anymore. So Ukraine need to do as much as they can, be as successful as they can, in order that the Russians don't have those bargaining chips. Bargaining chips are basically territory, really. So Crimea, and this is where I go back to say it really is all about Crimea. Don't get me wrong, Crimea is super important. I just wouldn't invade it early doors. But it may be that Donetsk might be a harder nut to crack, in all honesty, than Crimea. So partly because they have this entire corridor with which they can supply Donbass, whereas they only really have the Kerch Bridge if you assume that the Ukrainians take this whole southern area. So you've only got the Kerch and some ferries there. So I think Crimea will eventually be more a simpler affair. You've got a lot of pro-Russian sentiment in Donbass as well. So it will be difficult. So maybe at some point down the road, when Ukraine have done as well as they possibly can, obviously the best they can do is take all their territory back, and that may be achievable. I'm not saying it's not, but it could be a situation where they get Crimea and then Donbass is left in the Russian hands, and then there's some kind of negotiation that takes place. But as many people say, as many people are saying people are saying in the comments, no negotiations. Well, yeah. Obviously, negotiations have to happen eventually at some point. There's not going to be an infinite war, so there will be negotiations. Just you want, when that happens, you want to be in the power position. So, talking about the counteroffensive, DW have released an interesting article on that. This is a German media organization, but this one's in English. Goals, opportunities, risks. It's all the usual stuff that we've talked about previously. So the Bakhmut has been about attriting the German forces, fixing them in place. German, sorry, Freudian slip. Fixing the Russian forces in place, attriting them to a level where they are, exhausted and have no offensive capability and have less of a defensive capability. And then it's ripe for either a counterattack, or you've taken those troops out from being able to support other theaters, and those are the areas that will then be ripe for the counterattack. So there's talk about that. Why is it waiting? It's waiting for all the right kind of heavy metal to be in place, your tanks, your IFVs, all your bits and pieces, as well as your engineering vehicles, your demining vehicles, your bridging vehicles. All this stuff needs to be in place. You need to be trained on it, needs to be in place. You need your air defense systems like the Patriot systems. They want everything in place before. You don't jump the gun. You just got it. This is what the Russians did, which is, as far as I understand it, Putin supposedly put in the decree that hey, you guys need to take Donbass by the end of March, and that didn't happen. But of course, by putting that artificial time frame on it, the Russian commanders were then like, oh my goodness, we've got to do this now. We're not ready, but we've got to do it now. And that means they committed to a poorly organized, poorly planned, poorly outfitted offensive. And it didn't work. Where if you rush the Ukrainians here, there's a much greater chance that they don't execute an offensive to the optimal standards, so on and so forth. So, but it's also about why waiting. It's about the weather. Weather is super important. Interesting here. Digital news outlet Ukrainska Pravda estimates the army and the National Guard have created at least 16 new brigades, encompassing about 50,000 fighters in total. These new units need time to prepare and familiarize themselves with their new weapons, and additional challenges coordinating numerous formations for a major offensive. Until now, Ukraine has had little experience doing this. Professional circles in Kyiv say possible scenarios have been simulated on computers. I'd love to see what it looks like, simulating all these. How do you do it? But they have been doing combined arms maneuvers in Germany, in Grafenwöhr, I think it is, or somewhere like that. And I think probably Poland as well. But there you go. So then it talks about, where it goes on, weather being obviously super important. So you've got to wait till those heavy vehicles can travel with ease. So that Rasputitsa, sorry, I use the Russian word is Bezhtirizha, I think something like that is the Ukrainian word for the mud. Once that dries up, you don't want that to hold back large, heavy Challenger 2 tanks, which there are what is it, 14 sent over, but you can bet your bottom dollars there's double that. So and that's the same with a lot. I do wonder about a lot of vehicles that the headline news is we've given this many, and in reality, there could well be more. Right. So then where is it? And this is what everyone's talking about. Where's it going to be? In September 2022, in his only programmatic paper so far, Zaluzhny, who's the commander-in-chief, offered a rough sketch of how a Ukrainian counteroffensive might look. In the paper, he spoke of several resolute, ideally simultaneous counterattacks. One strategically crucial target Zaluzhny mentioned was the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014. In Kyiv, all agree this is the main direction Ukraine should focus its efforts, but they are also expecting surprises and deceptive maneuvers. Many, however, doubt Ukraine has enough equipment and fighting power to regain the peninsula, maybe not in the first instance. Now, Thomas Tyner, I shared with you a thread of his where he's talking about concentrating 30,000 troops or whatever in a like 1 to 3 kilometer area. Literally that many pile in, you punch a hole. I was speaking to a friend today, a former tank commander, who was kind of agreeing with this, is where you seek out a weakness, you do all your work to find out the weakness, and then combine arms, everything. You need helicopter support. That's really important. He was saying helicopter support is really important. Um, and you're smashing in, and then after that, as Thomas Steiner said, you then, once you've found that hole through the defenses, you then spread out around and you're cutting people off and stuff like that. And it's momentum, momentum, momentum. Yeah, so expect that kind of counteroffensive. But as it says here, it would not end the war. So it's how far, how long will that momentum go? How far can they take it before it sort of culminates, and then what happens after that? So is there still the appetite for the West to continue supporting Ukraine with the amounts of kit and training that they will need to then take this on to the next step? Or what you don't want is that to culminate, the momentum to run out, and everyone go, well, that was that, and then allow the Russians to reconstitute their own forces, and then continue with this protracted war even more. Right, let's go on to military aid and whatnot. I hope everyone's still okay in the lives. We've got 632 people. Welcome, everyone. Really good to speaking to you all. Smash the like button. Absolutely, Cheryl. Always worthy doing these kind of YouTubey things like hitting bells, smashing like buttons. I love it. I don't know what it all means, but do it. Or something. Right. Okay. Now, military aid, humanitarian aid, financial aid, all these other kind of things. Right. Germany has confirmed the transfer of the second IRIS-T air defense system to Ukraine. In total, it was promised to transfer. So they promised to transfer 4 such air defense systems. These are very capable air defense systems. So what does it give you? 360-degree protection, a range of 250 kilometers. That's for the radar. Elevation of 90 degrees. 20-kilometer deployability for the launcher, high firing power, effectiveness in multiple target engagement, 360-degree protection, up to 40-kilometer effective range and 20-kilometer altitude. So that's the range as the crow flies, and it kind of map distance from here to there, but also distance up. And the higher you go, obviously, the less far you're going to go in kind of as a crow flies. Because crows don't normally fly directly upwards. Command and control system, and that's super important. I was talking about how the US has sent this uber amazing command and control system that can join all the NATO bits of kit up, and you should be able to join the Soviet bits of kit with some kind of shenanigans, but you might have to telephone rather than pressing a button to fire stuff. You might have to phone it through and say you need to fire your OSA or whatever it is at, rather than doing it all from the central controls system. But yeah, that's going to be really important going forward, I would have thought. So this RST system is the second one I sent. They've also added to that 8 Zetro trucks and 2 load handling trucks as well. So RST, Zetros, and those kind of load handling trucks, super important, because it is, yes, the counteroffensive is going to be super important, like what tanks they've got, but it's also going to be, and how many trucks have we got to continue getting the supplies to the front lines. Because if you don't have the supplies, if your logistics are screwed, then hey, you ain't going to have food, and you ain't going to have fuel, and you ain't going to have ammunition. So it's about having success right across the entire theatre and across these different sort of areas of force. Right. Czech Republic, it's so good that Pavel became the president. Although it's not this like the most powerful position in Czech politics, he is kind of being quite I guess a bit of a figurehead in his very open support, being previously NATO commander himself, I think he was. He's now being a bit of a figurehead for communicating the need to the Czech Republic population to support Ukraine. In cooperation with our other allies, the Czech Republic will look for ways to increase the supply of ammunition to Ukraine. So again, it's the same idea about ammunition. This was stated by the president, Petr Pavel. From the meetings I held in Ukraine, and there were many of them, both at the central level, because he's just been there, and at a level of one region, it became clear that the most important thing for a successful defense of Ukraine today is ammunition. Okay, Great Britain wants to buy long-range missiles for Ukraine as part of the special IFU fund. Proposals for urgent purchases must be submitted by May the 4th, 2023. It's expected the priority will be the purchase of missiles with a range of up to 300 kilometers. This is fascinating. This is like putting out a government tender. They're saying, right, these are things we want. See what you can give us, guys. We're willing to pay for this. So the UK don't have the missiles, right? Evidently, we just don't have the missiles hanging around in warehouses. Yeah, we'd love to have a load of 300-kilometer missiles we can whack on your high Mars and you can shoot the Kerch Bridge until the cows come home, or until they can't come home because they can't cross a bridge, and they're whatever. I digress. But the UK have said, right, we're willing to pay for them, but this is what we need. So essentially, it's like a job. It's just like a job advert, isn't it? Your essential skills and your desirable skills. It really is. Essential requirements: missiles or rockets with a range of 100 to 300 kilometers, land, sea, or air launch, payload 20 to 490 kilograms. Desirable requirements: low probability of intercept (LPI), includes mission planning capability, assured navigation with hardened global navigation satellites system capability in the face of advanced countermeasures and EM spectral denial, air defense penetration methods to increase probability of successful strike, and technical readiness level of at least 8. Don't know what that means, but they desire it. It would be nice if they did a spell check on their official government documents, but hey ho. So the UK wants to procure long range missiles for Ukraine with a range of 100 kilometers to 300 kilometers and a payload of 20 to 490 kilograms. As said, companies have till May the 4th to do that. Okay. At the moment, 100 kilometers gets you to about here, so you can't quite get to the Ukrainian border with Russia in the Donbass area. You can't really hit Crimea unless you're using other things than HIMARS. So HIMARS have an 86-kilometer range, but you can stretch them a little bit further. They just won't be as accurate as far as I understand it. 150 kilometers, that's where you're going to be using GLSDB and these other sort of munitions that we really haven't heard that much about. They're supposed to have these. But they also have their HRIM 2, which are missiles that we know can reach the Kerch. So they can reach 300 kilometers at the moment. Just don't know how many of those missiles they have and what their production capabilities are, production capacity. Now, UK is saying, right, we want missiles that can hit targets within this range, and that's fantastic. Get on with it. Let's get them there. Danish government has launched a new program to support Ukraine for 1 billion euros. This was stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Denmark, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, during a joint briefing in Odessa. The main goal of the program is the restoration of Ukraine. The reconstruction of Mykolaiv will occupy a special place in this program. It's interesting how certain countries seem to be taking on certain things as they talk about specialization. Like, if you're not happy providing, so Switzerland, if you're not happy providing weapons and ammunition because you're neutral, okay, you concentrate on doing humanitarian stuff, and it means that America doesn't have to concentrate on humanitarian stuff. Like, you can do that, and everyone specializes and does their own little thing, and that's great because overall, everything is provided, right? So rather than have a go at, say, for example, Switzerland, just picking on Swiss for no particular reason, but that whole neutrality thing, Austria as well. Fair enough. That's how you want to be. I mean, it would be really useful if you can get that Gepard ammunition. But if you're not going to do that, then do this, and then we don't have to do this, and we can worry about that. So that's how I see it. Denmark are being super cool. They've got. So I said the other day that all of their Caesars that they are giving, is it 19 Caesars or something like that, are all in Ukraine. And I think Thierry said on my threads, no, they're not. And then there was confirmation that they are. There are claims that they are. So I think, or at least they are being claimed that all those Caesars are over there. Some are saying that some haven't been built yet or something like that. But the Ukrainians are claiming that all the Caesars that the Danish were promising are there. Right, Ukraine has signed 3 new agreements with the Turkish drone manufacturer, Baykar. These guys make the Bayraktar, although the details aren't sort of given out, so don't know what that will entail. But yeah, good news. They've done particularly well out of this conflict, as have many sort of in the industrial defense military industrial complex. Sadly, it's not an industry or sector before this war. And before my obsession, being the liberal I am, would have been, singing the praises of. and saying, yeah, great, they're making profit, but actually for defending Ukraine and for the importance of this geopolitically, yeah, okay, make your profit, because I'll tell you what, Ukraine need as much help as they can get. It's so important that Ukraine prevail. It really, really is. Right, T-55 on the road in occupied Berdyansk. They'll be used to stop the Ukrainians. So this is more evidence that the Russians are using T-55s. And again, hypotheses. Which hypothesis does this better support? Russia are great. They're going to win this. They're doing really well, as the Russian bots keep telling me in my thread. Bakhmut will fall. Hasn't fallen. Bakhmut will fall. Still hasn't fallen. Bakhmut will fall. 11 months later. Yeah, what are you saying? So, and then, you're so oh, look at all this copium. Yeah, you Ukro Nazis. It's like, yeah, okay. Just run along, children. Okay, the adults are talking. Uh, okay, you're doing so well. You're bringing in T-55s. How old are these tanks? Yeah, they're still a gun. They're still dangerous. Like, I wouldn't want to stand in front of a T-55, but yeah, T-55s, Abrams, Challenger 2s, Leopard 2s. Yeah. Okay, Russia continues to produce missiles. This is going back to what I've already said, but this is coming from Yuri Ignat here saying, but the production rate is low. This was stated by the Speaker of the Air Force, or the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So Yuri Ignat saying, yep, they're basically using newer missiles. That was the other claim, but also they're using them at the rate that they are producing them, which, is an indication that they've used up their stocks. Right. Because I'm balanced, right? I'm gonna have a go at a liberal, and then I'm gonna have a go at real right winger. So Noam Chomsky, sorry, someone I admired before this conflict. There's a lot of philosophy, the philosophy of language. I've listened to a lot of Noam Chomsky, but when it comes to the Ukraine war, I'm like, yeah, not so much. Chomsky has, according to this article, Russia has claimed that Russia is fighting more humanely than the US did in Iraq. The US linguist on the war in Ukraine, how the West is provoking China, and why the UK is not an independent country anymore. Yeah. But I was thinking about this, like, how do people get to these points where they are making incorrect evaluations of what's going on? And part of this is their desire to do so, and where their kind of allegiances lie. So if you're anti-US imperialism, which I had to admit, I am traditionally a bit anti-US imperialism myself, right? I'm an interesting one to be doing this kind of work, this kind of what I do here. This is a project. It's an obsession I have, but the moral dimensions for me have been so clear cut that they have overcome my criticisms, which still remain valid, by the way, of US imperialism, military economic imperialism. Now, I think that's still a thing, but I won't let that cloud my valuation of what's happened historically in Ukraine and how brilliantly the US have come to Ukraine's aid, as well as other countries, and so on and so forth. And so I'm a bit nuanced. So I guess some people who sit in that kind of critical position of the US foreign policy then see this war and then stay there and go, and this is all just part of that, rather than having an understanding that, hey, do you know what, Russia ain't too sweet here. And then it's the understanding that people like you and I, right, you guys watching this, and me, we're obsessed with this. I mean, this is why, like, 736 of you are watching this now. You're obsessed. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with this war. I'm obsessed with the geopolitics here. But uh, as a result of that obsession, we know an awful lot of stuff, right? We know, like, I'm giving you these curated news videos every day, and you guys most of you are sucking that up, right? And you're saying, right, so I know what's going on. Noam Chomsky isn't sitting there every day watching 2 hours of what's going on in Ukraine, right? So when he's making these judgments, he's probably reading headline bits of news and information. But if that is from certain sources that are pro-Russian or anti-American, then his sense of actually what's going on here will be distorted. and that leads someone who is otherwise a really good thinker to be in the wrong place here and having the wrong conclusions. So that's how I understand that. Um, anyway, you know, Noam Chomsky, you're just wrong on this, mate. Uh, but so that's this liberal guy who I otherwise really like is dead wrong. Don't say stuff like this. Do some more research. And then we have my best mate Tucker Carlson. Uh, so Tucker Carlson was sacked basically from Fox. It turns out that the whole Dominion lawsuit where Fox has been found to have, and I know lots of you love watching Fox News, and yeah, okay, so you might not like what I'm going to say, but this is facts. I mean, this has come out. So Fox were found to have lied to their audience, and they, in the pre-trial kind of hearings and whatnot, loads of information came out, and then you have Rupert Murdoch took to the stand and said, "Yeah, we did know that we weren't telling the truth," and it's all kind of really highly controversial. And in the end, they settled out of court, and Dominion went, "Yeah, okay, we're going to take $787.5 million, and that'll do us fine." Because actually, if they had taken it to court, Fox would have appealed and appealed and appealed, and there's no guarantee they would have got that kind of money, right? And it would have dragged on forever. So to be given a check for $787.5 million is like, yeah, they'd be like, yeah, we'll take that. But also, what came out is, in this case, Tucker Carlson's emails and texts behind the scenes to a load of people about a load of stuff. And as far as I understand it, the reason why he was sacked, they didn't sack him because he was talking nonsense, was lying, and was being a detestable human being consistently. They only sacked him because he was being detestable against them in some of the emails and texts that they found. So it's like, yeah, you can say that. I don't mind you say that. Don't mind you say that. What, you said it about me? Me? Right, you're out. So apparently, what Fox do, and this has been known for a long time, is that they have files on each of their presenters that, in case they need to, they basically have all the dirt on them, and in case that it gets to a point like this, they can say you need to go. And the reason why Tucker Carlson said nothing bad about Fox since he's gone is because he knows they've got this big like file on him, but he basically slagged off the Fox executives, and they didn't like that, and that's why he's gone. But since he's gone, what he has done, so he hasn't slagged off Fox, but he has continued to be a bit of a mouthpiece for pro-Russian narrative here. The US pushed Russia and Ukraine towards a conflict, and it's very clear to me the US government wanted this war, so on and so forth. So he's very much in still within that. And, this is being reported by Russian TV news channels. So that's where he's at. So, yeah, you're wrong. And you're wrong, Chomsky. Both of you are wrong. And here I am sitting somewhere in the middle, or something. Anyway, that's my opinion on that. Right. Uh, well, so this could be right here. Tucker is openly rooting for Russia, mostly because he just hates what he perceives as a woke West. I think it's a really interesting idea. And I think there is a sense of, if you really hate woke liberalism, and I hate using that term, but if you hate that, then you side with the people, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if you hate these things and I hate these things, then I'm going to like you. And I think there is an element of that going on, and that probably is partly responsible for his positioning there. Right, Sweden and Finland's navies. Sorry, knives. I can't even read. Jeez, it's been a long day. I told you. But Sweden and Finland's navies are on high alert after Russian naval ships have been spotted near wind farms and underwater power cables. It's been something that's actually been happening for some time. The Baltic nations, not the Baltic nations, sorry, the Scandinavian nations, and indeed the Netherlands, have known that the Russians have been hanging around the if you look, let's go and have a look at North Sea, and give you a bit of a map. Right. So here there are. This is the North Sea. You've got the UK. This is prime territory for wind farms, and as a result, there are wind farms all over here, and they're being well, not all over there, but there are wind farms in lots of places around here. Britain is one of the best places on earth for wind energy. and the Danish are big on wind turbines. Anyway, so the Russians have been sort of floating around these offshore wind farms for some time with, one assumes, the intention of getting as much information on them to screw them over when the time comes. And this is quite a security threat to all these nations, because if that's part of your energy mix, and an energy security issue. So the Russians seem to be onto that one again. And Swedish Navy commander says that they have convinced that Russia has mapped some of the targets. Sabotage operations by Russian naval ships are possible. The only thing about this is that I think it would be a low yield, high risk strategy for Russia to do that. If you're going to take out some wind farms or some wind turbines, it's not going to really hit your energy mix as much as taking out a single whole big hydrocarbon power plant or a nuclear power plant. So, but it could come with, it could bring with it a load of risks to the Russians. So, yeah, I can imagine they're doing this, but how much of an effect will it have for the Russians? I don't know. Right. So that is my daily news update. Goodness me, it's taken lots of time, hasn't it? 50 minutes. That's because we're doing a live and I'm just talking bollocks half the time. But let's get on to my extra. I hope you're still with me. You are. Thank you so much for being here. Big love to you all. Sorry, I'm unable to read your amazing live comments, and I say they're amazing. Some of them might be quite horrific, but I'm assuming you're decent people. So we'll move on to my kind of extra video now. I'm rolling two videos into one. Let's talk about some conversation pieces here. Now, this is something that I often talk to you. This it horrifies me. I hate stuff like this. I hate indoctrination of children in lots of different contexts. In this context, it's yeah, equally horrific. What will the future look like for these generations? Russian children learn to fight and march before they can read. This is a military parade at in a kindergarten. Putin Jugend in the Krasnodar region of Russia. Just, oh no, not a fan of that. Not a fan at all. Just anyway, we will move on. I referenced this the other day in one of my news pieces. Had a whole video on the cost of military aid from particularly the US to Ukraine, and how you need to be really nuanced when you're looking at the aid, and don't look at the headline figures. They are not representative of money going from the US to Ukraine. In fact, a large proportion of that money gets spent in the US. So it's like, yeah, we're going to send all these vehicles, and these vehicles cost this much money. That would be the replacement cost if we were going to replace those vehicles. But actually, if we are going to replace them, we're going to spend that money in our country or with our industry. So I use the example of Strikers, but actually Strikers are made in Canada, but it is an American company, the parent company. So we'll spend our money and the tax revenue and the jobs we'll create with that. So it's not like taking the money and throwing it out at Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And I talked a lot about the nuance and the way that money is spent, but also about what else that buys, and international security, and soft power and hard power around the world, which then translates into doing deals and business deals and your economy and your standing in the world. And all of this, all of what the US is doing is building up that capital so that they remain this kind of the US hegemony, the supreme power in the world, right? And if you as Americans, like, you are benefiting from that, one would assume, right? Rather than neo isolationism or some kind of, yeah, new American isolationism, where you go, okay, we're not going to help anyone else in the world. We're just going to sit back here as the US and not have anything to do with anyone else. Yeah, you're not going to be spending money on military aid, but you're also not going to have power around the world, and you're not going to be walking around the world doing massive business deals and having your fingers in all these pies. So yeah, it's great you can do that, but I'll tell you what, 50 years down the line, you guys won't have the standard of living that you have now. You won't have all that money swirling around the US economy that you have now. So you are, the idea is that the US aid is paying dividends, or if it's not paying dividends now, it will pay dividends down the line, as well as all the other things I said about that. Anyway, this article is sort of summarized. Was it a New York Times article? A defense news article. So how Ukraine funding works. The US Army donates old, redundant, or unneeded equipment to Ukraine. The Army receives $35 billion in supplemental funding to purchase new equipment, which is upgraded and cheaper. So, just to look at some of this. So, top Army officials expected to face difficult choices in 2024. They had warned reporters this budget might require them to axe legacy programs or delay some planned modernization efforts. And in the worst case scenario, the officials said they might even have to cut key modernization efforts. But instead, the service had used Ukraine supplemental funds in key programs, allowing the US Army to bolster several initiatives. The supplemental funding is the untold story about how it helps the army. So the American Army, is doing very well out of this. Supplemental funding doesn't just allow the army to avoid painful cuts, but it's accelerating its modernization. The army is getting back equipment that is in some way better than the equipment it gave up. And they're able to get it faster. The war in Ukraine has allowed for either an expansion in the industrial base or the per unit cost of systems coming down. So they're making more economies of scale. These things are cheaper per unit, and the American army is actually benefiting from that. Therefore, for a fixed amount of money, the army can actually afford to buy more systems. The US Army sent Ukraine hundreds of 1960s era M113s, but the army doesn't want to replace the donated aging M113s with new M113s. Instead, they're planning to use the funding to double buy more of the new AVMPs. So they're getting better things for cheaper. And then he says here, referring to the article, it's the same story with the M777. So that's a towed howitzer. After withdrawing from Afghanistan, the howitzers are no longer needed. Donated M777s are to be replaced with HIMARS. Stingers, they're to be replaced. So these are the man-pads, man-portable air defense systems you fire off your shoulder at aircraft and drones. They're going to be replaced with a new, better, longer-range version. So by giving this kit to the Ukraine, the American services are getting better kit and more of it, and for cheaper than they would have got it. So they're getting more of it, as I say. HIMARS, not only does Ukraine's funding allow for increased production up to 96 a year, but it also makes each HIMARS less expensive, reducing the cost from $6.8 million to $6.4 million. Because of ramp up, the launches cost that drop in price and the decreased unit cost for them. GMLRS rockets for HIMARS. The funding from Ukraine allows for an increase in GMLRS production from 6,000 rockets to 14,000 a year. Additionally, this funding reduces the cost of each rocket from 189,000 to 169,000, so $20,000 less for each rocket. And then the conclusion, and this is what I shared with you the other day, the army gets a majority of the windfall from Ukraine. They are, so to speak, rolling in dough. Meanwhile, the Navy is struggling and the Air Force ditto. The Air Force needs to convince Biden to send F-16s to Ukraine so that they can purchase new toys. There's a really interesting point. You would imagine the Air Force would be lobbying Biden and Milley and Austin to give F-16s. Please let us give F-16s. Yeah, but don't you want to keep on? No, give them. We want to give our F-16s. We've got a whole bunch of them. Let's give them that so that we can replace them with better planes, newer, better planes. I hope that makes sense to y'all. Right. Moving on to the next subject. Hope you're all still on board. Okay. Chris Owicki, who had some fabulous threads. This one was an interesting one I meant to share with you probably a week ago now. When was it? 27th? No, not a week ago, 3 days ago. Time flies. Right, the Siberian village, or doesn't, it turns out that it actually goes slower. The Siberian village of Mama is finding that Russia's huge military expenditure is coming at the expense of basic services. The villagers live among ruin all around and are having to dismantle and burn old buildings to keep themselves warm due to a lack of coal. The People of Baikal Telegram channel reports on the dismal situation facing rural Russians who have effectively been abandoned by the authorities in Moscow. The village has had no heating or water supplies for 4 years and is being gradually deserted by its inhabitants. A local energy company delivered less coal than was needed in the district and decided to save money by using wood chips. Residents say that their coal supply has fallen victim to scams by local officials. They are tearing down buildings to burn instead. The houses are taken apart at lightning speed, says one resident. They will clear the whole village of non-residential premises before the end of the heating season. These coal scams would not have been possible without the patronage of the regional officials. It's just corruption aplenty. Quote, "It's not the first year this has happened. There is no power. There is ruin all round. No coal, no doctors, no roads, no electricity periodically, and no businesses. We're living on subsidies. They'd better evict us and not torment us." But, however, as the Astra Telegram channel reports, and this for me is like the real issue here in this context, the region's governor has praised local coal companies for recently spending 20 million rubles, $245,000, and it will bite. It will bite financially and in a more abstract way as well. And this is the last thing I'm going to share with you. Thank you so much for um, being here with me. This is going to be a long thread from me old Aussie mucker. I don't know him, of course. Mick Ryan, who's a retired general, is well worth following. Thank you, Matthew Cook. Great work, John. Appreciate the content. Hope you're taking steps to prevent burnout. Yeah, good point there. No, but I'm still all right at the moment. Um, anyway, so recently, so we'll go on to Mick Ryan's thread here. Recently, there's been discussion about the strategic and political importance of the Ukrainian offensives that are likely to be launched in the coming weeks or months. The focus of these articles has often been about the consequences of failure. As of the 24th of April, New York Times article argues, without a decisive victory, Western support in Ukraine could weaken and Kiev could come under increasing pressure to enter serious negotiations to end or freeze the conflict. But what does victory look like? One of the weaknesses in the speculation about future Ukrainian offensives is that there is no definition of victory. There are no clear descriptions of how success or failure might be measured or perceived in Ukraine, Russia, or in the West. This is so super important and pretty obvious, isn't it? Um, so, what is the definition of success? What does it look like? And that will, allow us to be able to measure this success. So, as Shashank Joshi recently wrote, and he's the Economist defense correspondent, I see everyone is already arguing over whether we are too pessimistic or optimistic about the Ukrainian counteroffensive without anyone spelling out what precisely would constitute success or failure. In military operations, measuring success is most often associated with the achievement of missions. Missions are critical elements of military operations for several reasons. First, they provide aiming marks that from senior leaders to inform planning. Second, they describe both tasks and purpose, which provide, and there's a YouTube channel called Task and Purpose, so this is a military term, which provide direction to commanders as well as allowing for the exercise of mission command. Missions also underpin nesting of objectives at different levels to achieve unity of purpose and inform prioritization. But assessing mission achievement in the coming offensives may not be sufficient to judge the overall success of the Ukrainian offensives. This is because the achievement of tactical and operational mission objectives will also have important strategic and political impacts. Therefore, separate and more strategic measures of success and failure are necessary. Now, of course, political success and tactical military operational success might look like different things, but of course, they're going to be joined. There's going to be an overlap. You're not going to have political success without the military success, right? So there might be different ideas. Something like Bakhmut might look like a tactical loss if Ukraine lose Bakhmut, but actually the overall operational gain might mean it's worth it. It's a Pyrrhic victory, and then depending on the date, you might get a political win or a political loss, and so these things can be assessed in very different ways. So the definitions of success will be heavily influenced by scale and timeframes at which military operations are conducted. This implies that measures of success might need to be designed around the different levels of operations and different timeframes. There is a close relationship between measures of success and military effectiveness. In the 1980s, Alan Millett and Wick Murray conducted a detailed study of military effectiveness. The outcome of their study was a 3-volume series of books exploring military effectiveness. The 3 books examined World War One and the interwar period in World War Two each applied an analytical framework of political, strategic, operational, and tactical effectiveness to explore effectiveness for multiple countries. This is relevant because levels of military effectiveness, like measures of success, are linked. A nation will not achieve political objectives if it can't win battles, exactly what I was just saying, or can't generate the most relevant warfighting concepts, trained military personnel, or logistic support. The level of training and support, strategic training and support to Ukraine before the offensives will impact on battlefield or tactical success. This in turn will have an impact on the achievement of Ukraine's political goals for the war. Again, what I was saying, and the political support it receives from other nations. I love it. It's like I don't read these threads; I just know they're going to be good threads. So I haven't read this before, and I love it when some of my spiel is actually what he says. It just means I'm not just talking out my posterior, although I could be doing that as well. Therefore, measures of success for the coming offensives will be an important way in which Ukraine and others can judge the impact of those offensives. They will also provide a mechanism to inform Ukrainian strategic influence activities during and after the offensives. The importance of measuring failure is less apparent. In describing a set of nested missions and desired strategic outcomes, identifying and describing the important mistakes that could obstruct the pathway to these objectives is often an afterthought. This is going to be really important. With the coming counteroffensive, people are excited. People are genuinely excited about the potential success of the Ukrainians. But it's about expectation management because it could be that the Ukrainians just don't achieve that, or they do it much more slowly than you might think. And it's about measuring, like, what are the successes? Do we really expect them to do lightning achievement of objectives, or So are the public's metrics very different from the military and political leaders? Almost certainly. How do we go about navigating uh, our understanding of success and failure? A wide array uh, of failure mechanisms for military organizations and military operations are explored in the literature that covers this topic. And he goes on to talk about a few of them and list them there. That all explain military failure. Kernan Gooch's military misfortunes provides the most immediately applicable method for identifying, preventing, or adapting out of failure. They explore military failures, producing failure matrices which identify the critical pathways to disaster. Three types of errors can result from simple to complex failures: failure to learn, failure to anticipate, and failure to adapt. And interestingly, Mick Ryan is an expert on adaptation in war. That's where his forte is. I will return to these when describing the specific measures of failure for the forthcoming Ukrainian offensives in the next thread. And we'll talk about that in the next video. When planning and executing complex military operations and aligning them with strategic and political goals, aspirations should focus not only on success. Some attention is needed for the large and mostly small failures within the execution of these activities. Therefore, in considering the forthcoming Ukrainian offensives, there must be an articulation of what failure looks like. If these can't be mitigated in advance, and when you're planning stuff, right, you've got to think about what are all the outcomes. You need to have everything planned. What happens if this failed? No, this is our objective. This is our objective here, 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 here. Okay, what if we fail with that objective? Then what? And then how do we mitigate? Okay, so that's what failure would look like. How do we then plan so that doesn't fail? And then you have these different levels of planning so that you're just working like clockwork and you're not surprised by anything, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If these can't be mitigated in advance, there must be methods for their detection and the adaptation required to fix them. There is a need to move beyond simplistic doomsday reporting about what happens if the Ukrainian offensives fail. I must add here, I am an optimist about Ukraine's chances. I was wondering this. It has consistently surprised experts throughout the war. Now that we have explored the rationale for measures of successes and failure, a second thread in the next couple of days will propose detailed measures of successes and failure for the offensives to be conducted by the armed forces of Ukraine. So that's kind of basically just laying out the groundwork. Didn't give too much detail, but just the sort of ideas of what he's going to be talking about. And in the next video, probably my next extra video, we'll delve back into Mick Ryan's thinking to see what his thoughts are about that. Right. Now, that's the end of my stuff. That's the end of my all my threads and tabs and the content I've got to talk about. Let's just go back to you guys and see if there are any sort of questions or anything you guys want to say. Thank you for no doubt a very lively live chat thread. I can't talk to all of these comments and questions, but really appreciate that. So what I'd like to do, and in fact, I might do this in the next day or so. I might do a whole uh, community poll for what you guys think the chances of success will be and timeframes, and just, I know it doesn't mean anything. You guys aren't the experts. You don't have the knowledge. I don't have the knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes in Ukraine. But it'd be interesting to see what you guys think about what success will look like, what the chances of success or failure are, what the timeframes will look like, how far you think the counteroffensives will go here and there. Anyway, um, fantastic. That is, I haven't got too much more to say. I really appreciate your support, guys. Thank you for supporting the channel. I have a new book out now. This is my proof copy. No, this isn't proof copy. This has come hot off the presses. Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide. If anyone wants to pick that up, that is now available on paperback. Or no, it's available to pre-order May the 4th. Because Star Wars and all that is when it will be sent out to be delivered. So yeah, have a look out for that. I've got a couple of fiction books that may or may not interest you. Dystopian fiction, Johnny Pierce, Survival of the Fittest, Metamorphosis, and Adaptation. Those are quality fiction paperbacks. If you want to check those out, please do. Anyway, I'll be doing a lot of kind of publicity work. I'll be on a lot of podcasts about this in the coming couple of weeks, about this book that's just out. And so I'm going to have a very busy few weeks ahead, but I will certainly not compromise on my Ukraine videos, because that is an obsession that is not easily quenched. So there you go. Anyway, thank you for watching. Really appreciate your audience participation, and just want to see if there are any last questions about what you might want to know about that might be in my head. Let's have a little look. Russia is using to Ukraine. Can it escalate against NATO and the US? Really? I mean, there is an interesting conversation in this, which is Russia, since China have quite explicitly not got involved. They've sat on the sideline. They've sat on a fence. They are watching and waiting to see what will happen, and this will guide their activities concerning Taiwan, I think. But Russia must be in a position where they are thinking, "Oh, right, China haven't come to our help, really. We're having to get some ammunition from Iran. Okay, we haven't got many friends anymore. No one really likes us. And we appear to be fighting against the combined arms of NATO." And they must be thinking, can we really win this? Like, surely there's a realist in the Kremlin that goes, surely someone like Putin can't be that having that ignorant of what's going on. But perhaps he is. I've talked to you about this before. The Varenya, the idea that bullshit just goes up the chain of command until no one's got an accurate understanding of what's going on. And then when you have someone like Putin that doesn't use the internet, literally doesn't use the internet, doesn't use a smartphone, thinks the internet's part, is deeply paranoid. So he's a very paranoid person. He gets files, different color folders, like manila folders, like subjects and stuff. Not check. He cannot fact check that which he is given. I mean, say what you like about any president in the world. Any president in the world uses the internet, so that if one of their bosses says, "Oh, by the way, it turns out that," it's like, imagine like Rishi Sunak in the UK goes and his military commander saying, "Oh, it turns out the French are really weak, and if we invade France, like they'll welcome us with open arms." Like Rishi Sunak could be like, "Are you sure?" He just Googles, "Do the French really like the British? Is now a good time to invade?" And he'll be like, Google will go, "No, that ain't a good idea." But if Putin can't even really do that, Putin doesn't use the internet, then the only way he can fact check that which he is being told is by asking other people to fact check. So then there's still this idea of, well, he's still being fed. Those people are going to feed him like a narrative, and so he lives in this world of just garbage in, garbage out. So he doesn't have good information, and so he makes bad decisions. And here, when I say, well, surely there's a realist that knows what's going on, but if the decision makers at the top are living in this bubble and it's all just corruption and nonsense, then I don't know. Maybe they don't realize that they just can't win this. Um, but yeah. Anyway, that's that. Thank you for that question. Not that it was necessarily directed at me, but just yeah, nothing like a sidebar. Would love to see a future discussion on Russia's self-inflicted demographic damage due to the war. Yes, this is a really interesting point. So they've lost loads of key working age men with expertise that have escaped from Russia because they um, didn't want to be mobilized. So up to a million plus people. Uh, with There's talk about in the IT industry, brain drain there, lots of other areas, but also people that have been sent to war. And in fact, I did do a video on this, but it would have been like 4 months ago now. That there was an analysis of certain industries that are just there. There was some guy in Russia saying, "Well, I don't have these kind of metal rollers or whatever they are." I forget what it was, but it's like, yeah, like we've got one person left of four, and to do this duty because all the others have gone to the front line, and you're like, yeah, that's going to affect how your businesses work and how your economy work. So yeah, this is a huge. I think it will be affecting them now, but they'll be lying about their stats, and it will affect them going forward. There's going to be a long-term issue for the Russian economy and the manufacturing service industries, all of their industries. This war, I maintain, is a single worst decision made in the last. I don't. I will wonder. I wonder whether this is a worst decision made these sort of World War II, World War One decisions. I don't know. Like this is such a brainless decision. I don't know. There'll be historians will argue about this. What's the worst decision made since the beginning of the 20th century? But this will be up there. And I don't know if there's any other questions to discuss. So I might have to knock this one on the head. Um, there's so much. I just don't even know where to start here. Let's see if let's pick a random comment here. Is if they went all in with Russia, NATO would start thinking about employing forces. NATO put too much in to do otherwise. Yeah, and there's a lot. And thank you for being a member, by the way, X Penguin 95. It's really cool of you. There's a lot of talk about China being very tentative because they know that like Russia is worth to China not very much, uh, other than in hydrocarbons, but actually they're buying cheap hydrocarbons from them. So, you know, mm, the yeah, great. And in fact, if Russia gets screwed over, they'll be able to do that even more. Like if Russia prevail in this war, it will get back to how it was before, and Russia would be selling hydrocarbons at a more inflated price. So some thinking would go. So I've talked to you about this before that I think China do better out of Russia losing than out of Russia winning. So actually, I think secretly China are fine with Russia losing. So if if Russia loses, then hey, that's cool. And then, but if they and also if they'd help Russia out so that Russia did win, the sanctions put on China would cripple their economy, which many people have been saying is on a precipice anyway and has been for some time. That it would just be an absolutely crazy idea for them to do that. And in fact, we know it's a crazy idea for them to do that because they haven't done it. Like the fact that they haven't overtly supported Russia, is all the evidence you need that helping Russia is not in their best interest. Otherwise, they would have done it. It's that simple. If it would have been a win for them, they would have done it. It's not a win for them, so they haven't done it. So that's that. Um, and finally, let's have a look at one more, another gen consensus. Has the EU seen the error of thinking they could have relations with Putin? Let's ask Macron. He's on the phone with Putin now. Right. Okay. This is an interesting one. I don't blame Macron for doing this necessarily. Like at the end of the day, he wants a legacy. He's also thinking about himself. He's thinking about France. He wants himself and France to be in the center of stuff, right? So actually, yeah, that's kind of what you do. You kind of posturing, positioning. Whether he actually genuinely really believes that he can get some peace arrangement sorted is another question. I don't know. Can't see inside his head. I think he'd be pretty stupid if he really thought he could. Like, it's pretty obvious what Putin thinks. Um, Now, I don't blame people like Merkel. I've said this for a long time. Like, people slag off Merkel for Germany getting into bed with Russia, kind of for a long time now. But if you were running a country and you said, right, Russia's a bit annoying, we want to change Russia. Now, we either go, no, you're evil, stay away from us, or you go, yeah, welcome in. We're going to change you by working with you. And I think that latter option is a far more sensible option. So I can really understand Merkel and saying, yeah, Putin, come and work closer with us. We're going to change you from within. And also, we're going to get cheap hydrocarbons. So you can't blame Germany for being reliant on Russian oil. Yeah, it's shot them in the foot now. But if Putin hadn't invaded Ukraine, people wouldn't have been saying, God, look at Germany buying cheap hydrocarbons from Russia. So hindsight is always 2020. But before this war started, Germany were like, yeah, we're getting cheap energy from Russia, and that's for the benefit of our country. So it's really easy to be hypercritical with hindsight. So I think, yeah, Merkel and others did take that option, and that option it just didn't work. Like, Putin was just beyond that kind of changing. Right? He becomes so paranoid, and Russia's become this oligarchy, corrupt oligarchy that's so screwed up that actually I don't think it's able to be changed from a like nicely welcome in, we'll change you from within approach. Now I think the only way that Russia can be changed is by a general reset, which would be horribly losing a war, losing all your friends around the world, working out that your only mates are North Korea and Iran, and even China, a bit like, yeah, I suppose you're all right sometimes. And Russia going, oh, right. So that's what we've achieved. And then having a political upheaval and resetting. I see that reset is the only thing that can happen. So I don't blame the EU and I don't blame Merkel for that. It's hindsight that allows us to be that kind of critical. However, the question is, well, can they reset? And actually, Germany had done an amazing job to get themselves off. So I did a video on this, when you look at how quickly they've weaned themselves off Russian hydrocarbons, it's been amazing. And everyone was doubting they could do it. And actually, their industry. So I remember on Ukraine, the latest podcast, they interviewed a big German manufacturer who like used huge amount of energy, and they're like, well, yeah, we really thought we were in trouble. And it turns out we cut our energy usage because we had to. We cut our energy usage by 50%, and that allowed us to then like look elsewhere. And so Germany's done an amazing job of getting off Russian oil and gas dependency. So I think the EU has changed and adapted well. And yeah, at the beginning of the conflict, the UK were like at the forefront of military assistance and are still doing pretty well, the UK. But I think the EU quickly went, oh, we can't be outdone by the UK. They've had Brexit and they're out with us. So like, if they are seen as a beacon here, then that's really going to make the EU look bad. So the EU really quickly, I think, adapted after that. And with the US, now everyone's just working together, and to unity of everyone working together, no matter whether you're in the EU, out the EU, America, whatever. I think there's that unity which is working to the benefit of Ukraine. Um, I don't know if that answers your question, GC. Thank you. Right, I'm Oski now. I can smell the food wafting through the cracks in the door. And I'm sure I'm going to get a right good bollocking for being on here too long. It's almost an hour and a half. Thank you, everyone, for all your support. You're legends. I really appreciate you. Take care, and I will speak to you soon. And thank you so much to the channel members. You are awesome. Toodle pips, and I will speak to you soon.